Let's just go to the first reports. I've been tracking this for a while. And if you look at around 2019, a lot of these institutions were doing research on how people are starting to feel politically alienated, how people were essentially become apathetic. As I did in a previous video called The Four Buckets, I talked about how those in power want either you to be on the left wing, either you to be on the right wing, either you to become apathetic, or either you to become a domestic terrorist and start shooting people. They love you to be in one of those four buckets, because particularly in the latter, because they can use that to actually suppress freedom even more. They definitely like people being in this left and right. They love the working class fighting against each other. They don't really awaken to really solve the real problems or identify the real problems. And any one of the issues I talked about, be it free speech, be it the issues with our health, like the pro-vax, anti-vax, or be it the issues with election systems and so on, climate, we can keep going on education. The elites always make every issue a left or right issue. And the fundamental issues never, ever get resolved. And this is a detriment to the majority of working people. For example, this report that came out in Europe talks about how people in Europe, written by Myrna Jusik, and she analyzed many countries across Europe. And she said that in looking at these countries, she said the youth in Europe are in a precarious situation because they don't really want to participate in politics. They don't believe in the political system. Again, this is in Europe. And she did a pretty detailed where she said young people in Europe do not feel they're adequately represented in national politics. At the same time, they report little political knowledge and interest in politics. Basically, they've checked out. And in a detailed analysis, she looked at all of these countries from Slovenia all the way to Serbia and Kosovo and Albania and all these countries. And she finds out basically the left graph here, very high percentage of people do not want to engage in politics at all. And here, the percentage of people that are interested in politics, very low. These graphs are very low. And here, people don't want to participate. They're done. They don't believe in their governments and their systems, etc. That's out of looking at most of the European countries. This other report, the Carnegie Endowment, who I don't really care for much, but the data is there. We can look at their data. They said, should America be worried about political violence and what can be done to prevent it? And this came out, again, a couple of years ago. And this is very interesting what they say. They say America's history of political violence spans our Civil War, decades of lynchings and the assassinations of the president, presidential candidate, and national community leaders in 1960s and 70s. You see, they're blaming the people. That's what's interesting about this sort of liberal elite organization. They do not want to understand the underlying issues. And that says Thomas Carruthers and Andrew Donahue find in their new book that while most polarized countries are divided along just one or two dimensions, America has three fissures. By the way, that's not true. A place like India, many of the countries, people can easily be divided. America has three fissures: ideological, ethnic, and religious, that overlap and augment one another. Now, I want to talk about the statement here. They're saying that America is being polarized, but what they are missing, because these guys are part of the elites, is that the elites can literally use religious differences. They can use ideological differences and ethnic differences and draw a wedge and create the left-right narrative. And they do this. Polarization, you may want to write this down, is a weapon of the elites. Polarization is a weapon of the elites. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up in India, my mom would say that in India, you can be discriminated or you can have fights like 10 different ways: by religion, by caste, by what part of the country you came from, by what language you spoke, and ideology, and ethnic, and religious, and the color of your skin, in many ways. But for thousands of years, people with all those differences lived in relative peace. When colonialism came to India, they used these divisions to have this group fighting against this group. That's how the British divide and rule. This is an imperialist, colonialist technique. We all have differences. We have millions of differences, genetic differences, all sorts of differences. But if you're a clever politician or a deviously clever politician, you can use those differences to create groups and have people fighting against each other. This Carnegie thing, yes, there is polarization, but what they don't want to do is they don't want to put the mirror at themselves and the elites who have created this polarization, because the elites need polarization. Why? To distract from other issues. And we're going to get what those issues are. So that was in the Carnegie report that came out. So I went and looked up Thomas Carruthers and the other report, and this again was written a couple of years ago, and it said divisive politics and democratic dangers in Latin America. Again, we've talked about Europe, where people are feeling polarized and they're just exiting the political system. We've talked about the Carnegie Endowment acknowledging there's a divisiveness in America, but just putting the word violence on it. Then in Latin America, this analysis was done, and they talked about Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru. All of these countries, and I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but they do a detailed analysis of what's going on in Bolivia and in Chile, etc. And that analysis is interesting because it shows even right in the other part of our own hemisphere in South America, there's massive divisiveness going on, and politicians exacerbate those divisiveness.